Infrastructure is the basic term for physical systems of a business or nation. Transportation, communications, sewage, water, and electrical systems are all examples of infrastructure. These systems tend to be high-cost investments and vital to a country's economic development and prosperity. The infrastructure is important for faster economic growth and alleviation of poverty in the country. The adequate infrastructure in the form of road and railway transport system, ports, spas, airports and their efficient working is also needed for integration of Indian economy with other economies of the world. Infrastructure problems were not the central focus of the policy when the reforms began in mid-1991. The agenda for reforms in the early years were understandably dominated by the crisis management. Besides, infrastructure was not a significant constraint on short-term economic performance. The first strategy for infrastructure development was articulated in Eighth Five-Year Plan in the year of 1992. Now we'll discuss all the aspects of infrastructure with respect to Eighth Five-Year Plan. Possible role of private sector in building infrastructure was first recognized in the Eighth Five-Year Plan. Electric power generation included some of the independent private utilities supplying power to Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Calcutta. Roads, ports, railways, and telecommunication were exclusive public sector areas. The cautious approach of the Eighth Plan contrasts with the rethinking taking place elsewhere in the world, questioning the traditional acceptance of the public sector as the natural supplier of the infrastructure services and shifting towards the positive preferences of the private sector suppliers wherever possible. Despite the dominant role accorded to the public sector in the Eighth Plan period for infrastructure development, the actual experience was one of the public sector investment falling short of targets. Now we'll discuss infrastructure sector in detail with respect to the Eighth Five-Year Plan. Shortage of power was perceived to be a critical constraint at the start of the Eighth Five-Year Plan. The shortage was on an average was 8% and the peaking shortage was on an average 18%. The demand was far too expected to grow much more than the economy, and this clearly required a substantial expansion in the capacity. The performance in expanding capacity was rather disappointing. The requirement for generating new generation capacity during the plan was initially estimated at 40,000 megawatt, but the addition was only 16,400 megawatts. The poor performance of the public sector in expanding the capacity is largely a reflection of the deterioration of the financial health of the state electricity boards. Although India's telecommunication network is 14th largest in the world, telephone density at 1.3 telephones per 100 persons is much lower than the other emerging markets in the world. This is clearly a great deal of catching up to be done. Also, the tariff structure in telecommunication is financially viable unlike the power sector. Another important difference between telecommunication and power sector which may have a bearing on performance is that telecommunication was under the control of central government while power was under the control of state government. India's ports were a major handicap in the effort to accelerate the growth and especially to achieve the global competitiveness. At the start of the reforms, 11 major ports were under the control of the central government, while 139 ports were under the control of the state government. As in other infrastructures, the policy of private investment was relatively new. In ports also, prospects of private investments could be a great help to the economy. Going forward, I would like to suggest few recommendations for the development of infrastructure sector. Given the number of permissions required to kickstart a project, a single window permission is much needed in the infrastructure sector. The government should also relook at the minimum alternate tax to make infrastructure sector more lucrative for private players. A lower minimum alternate tax should be considered for mega infrastructure projects. A long-awaiting demand from the industry about giving infrastructure status to social sectors such as health, etc., should be given. The government should also look into this matter. Given the role of infrastructure development and manufacturing in our economy, the government can play an pivotal role in kickstarting the growth in the sector.